Well, good evening, and I want to welcome you back to night 2 of the Restore the Joy series. Tonight we're going to look a little bit at work-life balance, so that should be exciting. I don't know how your balance is. I tried standing on one leg earlier today, and it didn't end well. But I don't think that's what Craig is going to talk about tonight. I just want to welcome you back. Just a couple of things that I want to share with you. If you got one of these or you'd like to fill out one of these, and the reason might be you might want to meet with our presenter, or you might want to speak with me or something like that, you are welcome to just fill in this little form and indicate that. Or even if you just want prayer, there's a place where you can write down that, and we would be more than happy to pray for you. You can fill it in anonymously even as well, so that's fine. If you didn't get one of these, there should be one in the back of the pew in front of you. So you can also use one of those and fill it in. There's a little box on the table outside that you can just drop those in. Also make sure that you have your name entered into tonight's giveaway. If you've got that, great. We recycled some of the cards from last night. And if you're new, if you're here for the first time tonight, make sure that you have that filled in. Let's see, what am I missing? I think that's it. So without further ado then, let's just bow our heads for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your goodness. Thank you for your love and for the mercy that you share with us. Thank you that we can be here this evening. I pray that you open our hearts and open our minds to learn more about the principles from your word to us. Thank you for all you do for us is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. I'd like to introduce our speaker. His name is Carr. Craig is from Lincoln, or currently lives in Lincoln, Nebraska. He is the ministerial director for the Mid-America Union of Seventh-day Adventists. So he's kind of like, I don't know, are you my boss? No, not quite. You're a colleague, and it's great. Yeah. He's a great colleague to have. Yeah. I don't know how it all works. I'm new here. But but Craig is really into running. He started somewhere in 2018 and literally has not stopped running ever since. And today I confirmed with him, what counts as running is at least 1 mile. Yeah. So you can't say that you ran to the fridge and back like I wanted to get away with. So Craig also enjoys other outdoors activities, including photography and golf, and we tried to play some today. Didn't quite happen, but that's okay. And let's see, Craig is married to Carissa, and they have 2 wonderful kids that they love. And Craig is a great guy. I hope that you get a chance to talk with him and get to know him a little bit. He has a real heart for people, and so I will turn the rest of the time over to you.
Thank you. If I come up, will you stop talking about me? Thank you. We did try so hard to play golf this afternoon. And if it wasn't so windy that even I could feel it in my hair, or it was raining sideways, I think we had at least 3.5 seasons today, right? It's such variety. It really is. What we learned about last evening was that to be a human is a pretty complex order. And to feel anxious about things that happen is normal. What's normal? Normal is a bit of a moving target. I'm not sure if there's anything I can do up here for the microphone. Thank you for your help back there. Whether you're on a particular schedule to try to get to a certain appointment that the person in front of you doesn't seem to realize and they're driving really slowly. Or perhaps when we lived in Colorado, we lived on a corner lot, which meant I had 3 times the amount of sidewalk to shovel. I didn't think that through when we bought the house, but we had quite a length on 2 sides of the house to shovel. But it also seemed like cars would go by and go around those corners a little too quickly for my comfort level, having small kids at the time. There are things that happen around us that might cause us to feel irritated or upset or even angry, and yet oftentimes those things are beyond our control. We may think it's within our control to blast our horn to try to encourage the person in front of us to go a little faster. Or we see the opportunity, as I think I heard someone say, someone passed them on the shoulder. I mean, come on, you know. But again, there are things that we do when we feel anxious that later we think, boy, I probably shouldn't have done that. Or man, that person, oh, I can't believe they did that. And whether they ever stop and consider it, who knows? But I want to talk today about a secret ingredient to life, and you'll catch on pretty quickly, you all will, that God knew we needed, because He's the one that made us and knows us. In fact, it is so incredible to be a Christian and a believer in Jesus that this same God who spoke into existence everything we know and beyond what we even know, also came to this planet as a human and experienced life around us. Now, perhaps Jesus might have lost his cool had the iPhone already been invented when he was around. Because during the Sermon on the Mount, people would be fact-checking him out there and distracted and not listening to him. I don't know about that. But I think in similar forms, there was plenty of his life experience similar to ours. I think about Jesus entering the temple and seeing how people were treating that holy space. It seemed more like a strip mall than a sanctuary. And it caused him to be upset, and using that anxiousness, he kind of took charge and moved a few tables, kind of knocked over a little bit of furniture to make a point without harming anyone. I think of the text, before we get into tonight's topic, that says, "Be angry, but do not sin." Oh, man, I thought we had it there for a second. You mean the Bible gives me permission to be angry? Well, it would be almost a sin to deny the feelings that we have and to suppress them and just act like they're not there. And yet, we have choices to make, given the various responses we have to life around us. There is a process we referred to last evening a bit. And there's an important piece of this process we're really going to hover over. But in the adrenal process, when we get anxious or excited about something, again, cortisol and adrenaline, those begin flowing, and there are certain systems like our large muscles receive more blood flow, our eyes dilate so we can take in everything around us, and there's other systems that shut down and say, I'll see you tomorrow. It's just amazing how the body responds in just a matter of moments. And as this adrenal response, this surge of energy comes over you, this is different than a hot flash, but similar. But it is like just powering you for that moment to meet whatever goal or obstacle or whatever it might be that's in your path. We can unfortunately get a bit addicted to this process. We call it procrastination. Any teenagers in the room? Maybe they've already left, but I can recall as a student those all-nighters that were powered mostly by adrenaline, that I hadn't done that project that was due the next day. I remember one time my friend and I, Roy, we were writing a computer program, printing it out on the white and green striped paper for those old enough to remember that. Whoa, tractor-fed printers, dot matrix, all that fun stuff. I know I look younger than that, but we were working all night long and finally got the program to work without crashing, and then we crashed. I mean, it was amazing how once the project was complete, it was like, whoa, I'm tired, and out we went for a couple hours before class started the next day. Were it not for alarm clocks, would you make it to work on time? It's interesting. I'm segueing from all-nighters to when your body has had enough rest, it wakes up. And we tend to get kind of in a rhythm. If we go to bed on time, we'll wake up on time. If we go to bed a little later, then, overslept, rush, that kind of thing. But it is amazing how our bodies are designed to wake up when we've had enough rest. How many hours of sleep a night do you get? How many hours of sleep? Somebody's laughing. Not enough is the answer. 4 hours? 5? Do I hear 6? I'll be like the auctioneer at the fair. Do I hear 7? 8 hours. Good for you. That's my girl. Believe it or not, I require 8 hours of beauty rest every night. Every night. And that's a third of your day, right? That would pay to have a quality mattress if you're going to spend a third of your life on it. But our bodies need to recharge. Back to this adrenal process, we get a bit addicted and dependent on this process to get things done. And it keeps going and going like the Energizer Bunny. It just keeps going and going. If the batteries wear out, we'll just pop them out, put a new pair, and just keep going, right? You got to have spare batteries. But in this process, the way that our body recovers from that surge of adrenaline and its effects on our body, and then to return to normal, is simply rest. Have you heard of it? To just rest? To put your feet up? To let your blood pressure and pulse rate return to that resting state? It's really quite something, but that's what's called post-adrenaline depression. Now, depression is not this kind of depression. It's literally like an exhale. The emergency is over. The task is completed. You can rest. Did you know the Bible is filled with themes like this? This running thing has become a little bit crazy, but literally for the last 5.5 years, I have run every single day. And I like the text in Romans 12 in which Paul refers to, let us run the race that God sets before us. Let us run with endurance the race that God has set. Looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. I love that because it kind of emphasizes my participation in this race, but it also emphasizes what I'm racing toward, because it's a whole lot better to be running toward something than to be running away from something. Did you know in the Middle East, even to this day, it is a sign of weakness to be seen running because you'll be labeled a coward. Oh, that guy? He must be running from something, So it's like if they see you running, excuse me, why are you doing this? In the story of the prodigal son, the one who cashed in and left his family, great embarrassment and shame to that whole household. When he comes to himself and he's returning and he's rehearsing his speech with every step, I'm no longer worthy to be called a son, just make me like one of your hired hands. The Father spots him, doesn't he? Which is an image of God. The Father spots him, and what does he do? He runs to meet him for two big reasons. First of all, he loves his son and wants to show his full and complete acceptance and love for his son. The other is, in that culture and time, that son had brought such shame on that household that anyone in the village that spotted that boy had permission to stone him and kill him. It was for his protection that the father is running to meet his boy. Rest. Rest is the primary cure to recover from the adrenaline process. But it would appear that we tend to short circuit that cycle. Because once one crisis is over, guess what? There's two more waiting for you around the corner. And I'm combining in that scenario your personal and family life and your work life and your church life and your other circles that you hang with. And when it's all piled up, it's like spinning plates, on sticks that you have to constantly keep going. But the adrenal process has a certain threshold that if we don't allow our bodies to rest, it builds up within us, and we begin experiencing physical symptoms such as joint pain, or even an elevated heart rate, or even chest pain, or other types of things that can affect us physically. Well, when our busyness delays us from getting the most important things done, which creates anxiety, or our procrastination somehow becomes a habit and it begins to control us. That adrenaline rush helps us get that important project accomplished, but then if it becomes a regular habit to wait and stress and cram at the last minute, well, again, we're not being good stewards of our bodies. We're abusing those emergency systems that God hardwired into us. So to rely upon an emergency system for daily life, does that make any sense? It really doesn't. It really doesn't. Not sustainable. And yet we somehow try. But if we can get adequate time to rest, this can be on the short term and on the long term. Perhaps you've had a really busy and stressful day, and it just feels good to go home, but I'm so glad you came here. There are times in which we need to try to get in bed earlier, or we somehow need to maybe sleep in just a half an hour longer the next morning, even though that might create a bit of a rush to get to work or whatever it might be. But again, it emphasizes that we can end up on that wheel like a hamster, and it's hard to jump off. It is. It's hard to jump off. But God has invited you to jump off. We'll get to that in just a moment here. But we're going to take an assessment. We're going to take a test. Is that okay? Or does that make you feel a little, oh, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for that. This is just a kind of a questionnaire, an assessment that you're going to give yourself. You're going to take it and score it yourself. So you're all going to get an A. Well, actually, if you get an A, that would make you a type A. We'll see how this works out for you. But this assessment is not entirely scientific, but it takes some generalities about life and kind of puts them all in the same spot for us to consider. And as we think about the results of this in a moment, Perhaps it'll add to your self-awareness, which is part of what we're going to talk about tomorrow night. Question one. I feel like there isn't enough time to do all the things I need to do each day. If that applies to you just about every day, I'd put a 2. If that applies to you every once in a while, I'd put a 1. If you feel like you have all the time in the world to get all the things you want done, 0. All right, next question. I tend to speak faster than others, even finishing their sentences for them. Okay, sounds like somebody is in a hurry. My spouse or friends say, or I believe, that I eat too quickly. I went to the original Chipotle restaurant on Evans Avenue in Denver, Colorado, where they make these monster-sized burritos. And the friend that I was with, by the time I was like in bite 4 or 5, his was gone. I mean, it was like, how did you inhale that thing? I mean, it's as big as an exhaust pipe. I mean, that thing's huge. Wow, could eat fast. I would rather win than lose a game. Any rook players in the room, or Life or Monopoly or Checkers or whatever it might be? I am very competitive in work, sports, or games. I tend to be bossy and dominate others. A 2 or a 1 or a 0. Some of you are already finished with yours, and that's good. You're fast. Your burrito is gone. Okay, next question. I prefer to lead rather than follow. I feel pressed for time even when I am not doing anything important. Feel anxious, feel pressed for time. Okay. I become impatient when I have to wait for something or when I am interrupted. That really got me when my kids were small and I'd be writing my sermon. And I was probably writing on like patience or love. My kids went around, stop that. It's amazing when you're preaching a sermon on love that week how it's tested all week long. I tend to make decisions quickly, even impulsively. Last 2. I take on more than I accomplish. I become irritable, even angry, more often than most other people. So there's a 0 or a 1 or a 2 beside each of those statements, each and every one of those statements. Okay. If you were to tally, if you were to, like a golf score, just total that column up all the way down, you'll come up with a total figure. Maybe it's a single digit, maybe it's a double digit. But total up that column of 0s, 1s, and 2s. If you had all 0s and 1s, you might be a computer programmer. That's some kind of binary code. I don't know. But 0s, 1s, and 2s, add them all up. And if you have a total of less than 5, rest assured you are not a type A personality. And you're likely very okay with it. Not a type A. Okay. Well, if you scored a total of 6 to 10, that's certainly signs of a type A. And most of the things that might irritate you is just sort of a fleeting or temporary feeling. It's okay. It passes rather quickly. And perhaps you're a combo of, and again, we're generalizing here when we refer to type A and type B personalities or types. If you scored 11 to 16, well, yeah, definitely a type A and prone to excessive adrenaline rushes. Not my words. Archibald Hart here writes this. And emotional and physical signs of distress may show up once in a while with a score of 11 to 16. Greater than 17 is living a bit dangerously, and perhaps physical and emotional dysfunctions may come along with that high level of type A. You can kind of tell from the questions what helps define or describe a type A personality. Many leaders are type A personalities. Leaders like high-level C-suite leaders, CEO type leaders, healthcare administration leaders, the kinds of people that get a lot done, and it needs to be done in a certain way, and the type of leader who leads themselves probably a lot harder than they lead others, but also has very high expectations of themselves and others. They likely work greater than 60 hours a week because they don't have enough time to get everything done that they want to get done. And it's often a visit to the ER that might wake that individual up, that they might need to make some changes in their lives. Why am I 37 and having chest pains? That would be a good question to ask if that's the case. It's nobody's particular fault. It's society has continued to crescendo in speed and intensity in order to be successful. We could spend the rest of the evening defining what a successful life looks like. But I think all of us might agree that it has very little to do with the number of certificates and diplomas on your wall. It has very little to do with how many vacation days you've not taken. It has very, very, very little to do with the family vacations that you had to leave early to get back for a business emergency. I'm thankful for my kids' generation that seems to get this idea a little better than I of quality of life. I'll use my niece and her husband as an example for just a moment, and I'll just hope that they don't tune in to hear this story about them. But they live out in the Pacific Northwest, and they are both nurses, and they make quite a bit of money serving as nurses and working really hard. I mean, 12 hours, when you're working 12-hour shifts, you work and you sleep and you work and you sleep and you work and you sleep. And then even that first day off, you're still recovering from those long, intense days when you serve in the ICU or in the ER or wherever it may be. People's lives are depending on you and the doctors and others. But it was a couple of calendar years ago, prior to that speed bump we call 2020, right? That their goal is to work 6 months and travel 6 months every year. Doesn't that sound pretty cool? I mean, they haven't had children yet. It's just the two of them. They're just having a great time. And one time on Facebook, somebody tagged them that they were with them, and they were nearing base camp at Mount Everest. I'm like, whoa, that's pretty cool. But this particular year I'm referencing, they only worked 2 months and traveled 10 months out of that particular year. I thought, well, that's starting to make me feel a little jealous. Wow, how cool is that? But I love my niece's husband's philosophy. I work to live, not live to work. You've heard it before, right? But again, while they receive a lot of fulfillment in their work, that's not the end all to how they live their lives. Again, there's balance. And again, not every year looks like that. That may just be a little different that particular year. But it is not a sin to work hard. And yet there's a diminishing return for the number of hours and when we go beyond our natural margins. And sometimes people need to simplify or slow down or just take a Sabbath rest. Again, these are words from the book Anxiety, Anatomy and Cure by Robert Kellerman. There's just too much that depends on me to get done, is that voice inside your head that tells you you can't stop. But sometimes people need to learn to say no to too many responsibilities. And this is not a good sermon to preach just before nominating committee comes on. It's okay to say no. No, Pastor, don't say that. But there are limits. Regardless of your income, you are given the same amount of minutes every day that I have. Same amount of minutes, same amount of hours, and there's only so much to go around. Sometimes people need to accept their limitations. We'll talk a couple nights from now from Pete Scazzero's book, Emotionally Healthy Leadership and Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, about literally embracing our limits, which kind of sounds like an oxymoron. Embracing our limits? I thought limits keep us from doing what we really want to do, and yet many of the limits that we come up against are actually guarding and protecting us from harm. And so seeing it as a safety net versus something you want to burst through and a rule worth breaking, right? So embracing our limits. Sometimes people just need to have fun. And it might be spontaneous or planned, but to just take a break from the everyday every once in a while. I don't have the actual statistics, I'm sure you've heard it before, but little children laugh a lot. And somehow when we become adults, we forget how. We might chuckle or laugh a few times a day when little kids laugh hundreds of times in a day. At the airport, I heard someone's smartphone notification they had set to a child's giggle. And it just made everyone around just like look and smile. I mean, that sound, it was like a babbling brook is peaceful. That sound just made everybody smile. It was amazing. Sometimes people need to set wise boundaries. It's easier to say some people than to say I, right? But there's one thing that God gave us that introduces us to this idea of margins, and it's called Sabbath. Rest. We're going to unpack that just a little bit, but you've heard of Beethoven. All of the artist renditions of Beethoven have always depicted him with a frown on his face, a very, very serious person. And for Beethoven, who was one of the incredible composers of his era, along with Mozart and others, Beethoven began this particular piece, his most famous symphony. He began the entire work on a rest. For those of you that read music or are familiar with music, Beethoven's fifth is bum, 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 bum. Well, it is that, but it's bum, 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 bum. He wanted to create this little bit of a lift launching pad into this theme that repeats over and over and over. And it begins with a rest. And this idea came over me, what if we were to work out of our rest rather than rest from our work? Think about how that would affect your life. That goes along with not needing an alarm clock, doesn't it? That goes along with that same theory that when my body is well rested enough, it'll wake up and start the next day. If we were to work out of our rest, we would be embracing the limit that when we need rest, we shut it down again and recharge and reset. Whereas we work, crash, and call it rest. This is a challenging thing to live out. It's one thing to talk about, but it's a challenging thing to do. Many people today admit that they do not rest as regularly as they need. And some of the primary causes are, well, we're just too busy. There's too much going on. I can remember a time in which I had a meeting just about every single evening. And of course, weekend obligations, school programs. My wife is an educator, teacher. My kids were in school. I mean, we were all just busy all the time. And even when we were together, we were kind of cranky with each other because we were so tired. And so even the quantity of time we were together, but the quality of time in which we were together was just no bueno. And again, there are seasons of life that we find ourselves in those modes. When we moved to Michigan for me to attend seminary, our daughter was 6 weeks old. And we were committed to my wife staying home and not working while our daughter was an infant. And so if I wasn't in class, I was at work. And if I wasn't at work, I was in class. And if I wasn't in class, I was at, you get the idea, or I was at home. But those days began early, and they ended very late. Having been back to that campus just last week and walking some of the sidewalks, I was just grateful to God that I survived that season of life. I literally just kind of stopped and went, wow, it's all kind of coming back like, whoa, that was a really busy season of life. And yet, God gave us the grace to go through that season and come out the other side. But we are a very, very busy culture. And we can sometimes get addicted to the need to be needed. What does that mean? Let's say that there are people outside of your family that depend on you in some form. But let's say that you're spending some quality time with your family, but you keep checking your phone to see if one of those other people outside your family might need you. And it's almost like, well, if they need you, they'll message you or they'll let you know, but do you have to keep checking the phone? And try this the next time you're at a table. Okay, many of us eat on the couch, but when you're at a table, I know, I get it, it's okay. Everyone put your phone in the next room. Everyone. I know, right? What's going to happen? Oh no, we're going to have to talk to each other. Oh my. The addiction to the need to be needed. And then having a lack of healthy boundaries. Boundaries has gotten a lot of press in the last 20 or so years, and they're a little bit misunderstood. Henry Cloud and many have written some wonderful stuff. And it's really, as you read it in its entirety, to really grasp the whole concept of boundaries is not simply the ability to say no to something. But it's recognizing that, for instance, if you open any book of any kind, you'll find that the content of that book is within reasonable boundaries from the very edge of the paper. We call them margins, right? If the printer were to print all the way out to the edge and all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom, first of all, you might wonder, what am I missing? Maybe something went right off the page, you know. But it also, it sends this message of overwhelm to your brain, and your brain will kind of shut down because it's like, it's not right. Our lives need margins. Just like any classic book, just like your Bible. around the edges of all that print, all that content, all that important stuff are margins. I like to write and take notes, so I end up filling up my margins a little bit. But boundaries or margins. We are often reluctant to set boundaries on our time, on our attention, or even on our company, or to restrict full and easy access to us in any way. Somebody say the word text. That is just one of those things that you can be having a live conversation with somebody, back and forth, and suddenly your phone goes ding, and you ignore that person you've been talking with. Oh, I love customer service counters. I walked into a restaurant a week ago in Lincoln with my lovely wife. And there were, count them, 5 employees all standing talking to one another at the customer service check-in kind of place. And so I stepped right up and I just stood there wondering how long I would stand there before at least one of them would notice that we were there. 25 seconds. I counted. 25 seconds we stood there until someone it's like, you're all getting paid, right? It's amazing the thoughts and the feelings that come over you when you're caused to wait. But what we're talking about is distraction. If you've ever read a book by the author Bob Goff, you will be blessed. He comes at the Christian life from a way that he says he likes to write books that church people can relate to, as well as his garbage man or somebody else. I mean, just, there's not lots of Bible verses quoted, but the principles of them are in there. One of his most recent books is called Undistracted. Undistracted. And I can see it's a blue cover with yellow print, and it's simply the lesson of, this is the whole book in a nutshell. Giving people your full attention. Being 100% present to the person right in front of you, undistracted. And yet, how hard is that to do in this time and this age? Well, without clear boundaries, there's no safety, no sanctuary in which the tender shoots of anything living inside us can possibly take root and flourish. Again, those are some pretty fancy words there by Wayne Mueller. But again, this idea of whether it's the creative process or whether it's relationships or whether it's something that's of great value to you, to put a hedge of protection around the time and investment in what's right in front of you. Think of some boundaries that you may need to set. Some boundaries you may need to set. Boundaries are pretty important once you get in your car and you want to drive home. That boundary that has 2 stripes in a yellow color that go down that's a pretty important boundary, is it not? Big time. Then there's the one that's a white stripe over on the other side, which comes in really handy when that irritating person doesn't realize they have their brights on as they're coming towards you. Just, it's okay, it's all right. There's not really anything you can do. Yeah, you can flash your brights at them, or it might just make them mad. But that white line over there has its purpose as well. To stay within those boundaries is safety. To wander beyond them is living dangerously. And we all have various boundaries that we set in life. Earlier I mentioned that type A personalities tend to overwork. They can't help themselves. Again, achievement and success, it really is never enough. But Stanford University did a study a few years ago along with the Institute of the Study of Labor, and they discovered across many different occupations an interesting parallel that looked very much like a bell curve. That's what data often looks like. We study this, we study that, but it often resembles a bell curve. And that's where you have the majority toward the middle and then the extremes over to each side of that data graph. But They follow people around, they ask questions, they wanted to understand productivity and how many hours per week where the highest productivity level was for a week. And they came up with the number 50. Now, that's quite a few hours, and yet there are many that work way past that. There are some that don't work that many, or they come in fits and starts, like 3 12-hour shifts is only 36, if I did the math right. It feels like 40 some, but when we think about long weekly hours and long daily hours, they don't necessarily yield a higher output. Productivity begins to fall per hour after 50 per week. And after 55, productivity drops so much that it's almost pointless to keep working, and it gets even worse. In fact, the study revealed that working 70 hours versus 55 would result in pretty much the same level of productivity. That's astounding when you think, but I worked 70 hours. Of course I got more done. Well, and even in the short term, yes, you may have accomplished more work, but the long-term effect that you may be causing yourself is likely not worth it. Why not invest that 15 hours between maybe it should be 20, but why not invest those hours differently beyond hours number 49 and 50? Okay. Richard Swenson, MD, a trained medical doctor, finished residency, began his practice in Chicago, and after a few years said, I'm not doing this life. I'm out. And one of his most famous books is called Margin. And he says, a line must be drawn on this side of overload. Circuit breakers exist for a reason, don't they? Right? When you think of an emotional circuit breaker, what would that look like for you? Oh man. Has someone ever says, boy, I blew a gasket? Or man, I really blew up at that. That's an emotional response to overload, right? Well, Dr. Swenson says overload, if we want to stay healthy, drawing such a line causes the overly conscientious to feel guilt. I appreciate those who have this sense of duty. Nevertheless, chronic overloading is not God's will. It is okay to draw a line. You can just sense that permission giving from Dr. Swenson. It's okay to not work yourself to death. The parable of the talents. I'm not sure how hard the guy that received 5 and the one that received 2, how hard they worked, but they worked, whereas the one that received 1, no work. Okay, that's, come on, you could have done a little bit, even put it in savings, get a little interest, right? But over-functioning, overwork is not part of God's plan for you. There may be short seasons in which it feels required of you, but for the long term, for the decade after decade, it will take its toll. Sometimes it may only mean sleeping in a few extra hours or even a few moments the next morning. Sometimes it means taking a day or 2 to compensate for the lack of Sabbath rest in your life. Sometimes it simply means that you schedule a day of lighter work. But it has to be specific to you how you might adjust your schedule, your calendar, your life when a busy season has taken over. What I find fascinating is I interact with, there's about 280 pastors and their families that serve in the Mid-America Union. And they're all different from one, I don't mean different, but they're all different from one another. But there are things that they have in common. One of them is they all work hard at what they do. And yet that work looks different one from the other depending on their location, their role, and all that kind of thing. I have yet to meet a pastor. I have yet to meet a nurse. I have yet to meet many professionals that don't at some point in describing their work describe themselves as busy. And yet we have turned busy into a Pathfinder badge of honor. If you're not wearing it, you must not be important. And I say, stop it. Stop overvaluing busyness. Wow, it's gotten us where we are now. I love the idea. Archibald Hart is a believer. He knows a lot about the Sabbath. He knows a lot about the effects on the human anatomy and well-being emotionally when we actively practice Sabbath. But I'm going to make maybe an assumption tonight that many of you here volunteer at your church. And you're one of the first ones to arrive. You're the ones that turn on the lights. My parents were the ones that turned them off. We were always the last to leave. I'm like, I'm hungry, let's go home, But you work during the week and then you volunteer your time. It all requires some amount of energy. It can all be a great joy. And yet there are times when we reach our limits. And so how do we supplement when the Sabbath that comes around, thank you, Jesus, every 7 days? Every 7 days. In fact, we're going to look at something that it just kind of right over my bald head until I was like, wait, there it is. Maybe it's on the next slide. No, it's not. But this idea of rest, it tends to show up sometime after lunch. Are you with me? My parents were both music teachers when I was growing up. And they would work hard teaching students all week long. And then on Sabbath, my dad would be at the organ and my mom at the piano helping lead worship. They got there early to practice with special musics and children's thing and all this kind of stuff. And they were the last to play, when we actually used to listen to the postlude, kind of thing. From prelude to postlude, they were busy, hard working at it, kind of thing. And then, it's not Sabbath unless you have a big lunch. But after that big lunch, whether it was potluck or at home, they would crash. And for good reason. They had worked so hard all week and all that Sabbath morning. But I can remember many a Sabbath bored to tears as a 3rd, 4th, 5th grader, Mom and Dad, in the next room. It's like, wow, what am I going to do, But I realized as an adult that's about all they could do because they were so exhausted. And that, again, in that season of life. So for those, whether pastor or leader or helper or otherwise, when the Sabbath rolls around every week and we spend at least a portion of that time volunteering our energies, where do we get the return on investment from that? Where do we supplement that in our lives to receive the same amount of rest that God invites all of creation to, this 24-hour sabbatical every week? I'm going to make a couple of suggestions here, but the Sabbath can offer us a sanctuary of time to rest, to recalibrate. It can be a refuge. It helps us have properly balanced rhythms of work and rest. And we talked about Beethoven and working out of our rest and not the opposite. The differentiation of the Sabbath from the other 6 days of labor that close the week of creation stands as a weekly margin of time and space. I love that statement. So this is the week of creation. And it had to have been a sight to behold, even though we humans weren't around to see it. but for God to speak the words, and as the psalmist says, he spoke the words and it stood fast. I mean, it just appeared. I love the book of Job. And in all of Job's struggles, toward the very end, before everything is restored and happily ever after Hallmark movie moment, God asks Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? Whoa, I love that. But every day of creation, God paused and he surveyed what he had made that day and he pronounced it good. Even that discipline would apply a margin in my life to reach a certain point in the day and I call it good. I am done for the day. And hopefully there's a little bit of day left before I can say that. You see the discipline of the pause of God each and every, it wasn't work, collapse. It's this rhythm of every day, this wonderful pause, not a full stop. I love that idea. Gordon MacDonald, a professor at Denver Seminary from whom I took one of my classes, he says, we do not rest because our work is done. God could rest. God could say, what I have done is perfect and complete. I'm done for the day. When can we ever really say that? But notice this statement. We don't rest because our work is done. We rest because God commanded it and created us to have a need for rest. We rest in faith. Hebrews 4, there remains a rest for God's people. By faith that it's in God's hands. Even the unfinished stuff I thought I was going to get done today. I need to rest. I need to pause. So Pete Scazzaro, who we'll explore several fundamentals that he outlines to help lead an emotionally healthy life. But in order to create space for Sabbath rest in our busy lives, he writes, we have to submit ourselves to concrete guidelines and that distinguish Sabbath from business as usual the other 6 days of the week. We didn't have a lot of rules for our children regarding the Sabbath. But one of the values, you could say, was we never want to reach the evening of Sabbath and then have to remember, now what day is it again? Because we know. Because we're living our life a little differently, a little freer, a little less hectic, a little less busy. And when our kids were in elementary and going into academy age, high school age, we lived in Colorado. And probably the best Sabbaths that we remember together was after lunch at church, heading up into the mountains, or just taking that lunch with us as a picnic up into the mountains and enjoying time together as a family. I miss those days. For some, this may include turning off all social media, phones, and computers. I know some of you will go into withdrawals, but it's okay. For others, it may be having a zero tolerance for talk about work. Perhaps the Sabbath might start and end with a meal, the lighting of a candle, or maybe a prayer. The key, his suggestions, the key to take the 4 principles of Sabbath: stop, rest, delight, and contemplate God. Those 4 principles: stop, rest, delight, and contemplate. Not complicate, contemplate God, and build your protective container accordingly. Friday night we'll talk a little bit about what a protective container, what a rule of life looks like. Okay, these are my priorities. Here's how I'm going to guard and protect that. I love Mark chapter 1 because it illustrates that Jesus could easily have been the most busy human to ever live, particularly once he was baptized. He had told the prophet Daniel 700 years earlier that he would have only 3.5 years to accomplish his ministry. That's it. A quiet life. We know nothing from age 12 to age 30 of the life of Jesus. We can make a few assumptions. He took over Father's business, carpentry, whatever. But the Bible's silent about it, and yet we see him in this incredible moment of John the Baptist. You should be baptized. No, really. And the Holy Spirit descending like a dove, the voice from heaven, this is my Son in whom I'm well pleased. Beautiful scene. And then he goes out in the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Sound like your life or my life sometimes? We had this wonderful experience with God, and the very next thing, life happens. Boom, blows up in our face. And it challenges, it rattles us. But we see Jesus for 3.5 years. That's all the time he has. And we never see him in a hurry. You can read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. In fact, I particularly like the book of Mark, but let's get back to Mark 1. Mark is the gospel for the ADD. I love the book of Mark. He's describing one story, and then he hyperspaces over here and starts telling another story, kind of thing. I love it. Now in the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, Jesus went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed. Like the pause of God each day. Quietness, solitude, prayer. Shh. That's how Jesus is beginning his day. And Simon, who can relate to Peter? I sure can. His mouth was always getting him in trouble. I love Peter. Simon and those who were with him searched for him. And when they found him, they said to him, like a mama of 4 little kids, "Everyone's looking for you." You can sense the anxiety in their voice. Everyone is expecting you, could be another translation. Everyone wants a piece of you, could be another way of saying it. And what does Jesus do? But, transitional word, but he says to them, "Let us go into the next town, that I may preach there also, because for this purpose I have come forth." Jesus would not allow the expectant crowd to determine his agenda. He let the Father determine his agenda. Now he's Jesus. But couldn't our lives look a little bit like that? Prioritizing our days in the quietest moments, not the noisiest moments. Well, I referenced this book last evening. It's a wonderful book written by a pastor out of Portland, Oregon, called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. Now, he didn't come up with that phrase, but it was advice he was given before he took his first really big church senior pastor role. He says, "Okay, my spiritual mentor, what advice do you have for me? What kind of visionary leader should I be, or whatever else?" And this mentor said these words: "You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life." Okay, that's a hard one to swallow. So he wrote a book with that title. Here are the words that we often find ourselves using: busyness, hurry, noise, isolation, crowds, distraction, envy, confusion, greed, discontentment, worry, anger, angst, melancholy, sadness, anxiety, working for love. Then he compares that to words that can bring rest and healing: margin, slowness, quiet, deep relationships, time alone, delight, enjoyment, clarity, gratitude. And you can see the opposites in either column there. Even in our language, I don't know if there's any HR professionals here or any bosses, but oftentimes employees earn vacation time. Are you with me? Do some of you earn vacation? Okay, so you accumulate and earn this vacation time, but what word do you use when it's time to cash that in? You take vacation. Even in the language, you've earned it. It's yours. You don't have to steal it. You don't have to take it. It's yours. Enjoy it. Take it. Go. Sometimes it's necessary to stop one thing before another thing can begin. Think of your husband watching football. If you're going to have a meaningful conversation, it might not be the right time, but that conversation won't be meaningful until his focus is not on the game and it's on you. Would you agree? Sometimes some things have to stop, even if it's just a commercial break, before another thing can begin. We're often reluctant to set boundaries because we might appear aloof or unkind or unhelpful if we're not in full and easy access. Without clear boundaries, no safety. And we actually read that quote a little earlier. What's interesting about pastors who listen to Pete Scazzaro, a fellow pastor in New York City, a church planting pastor, one that worked way beyond 50 hours per week for the first 20-some years of his career. But he noticed something about his congregation, that they weren't growing spiritually because many of them weren't growing emotionally. It's like one is a container for the other, and they're so closely related. But this is what he observed of pastors who he would share the truth and the freedom and the rest that Sabbath offers. He says, pastors agree with me. There's no argument. In fact, they go back to their churches and they preach about it to their people. The problem is they don't do it. They don't practice it. Because let's face it, it's a whole lot easier to preach about it than to actually do it. But there's some identity issues at work that Pete's good friend, a psychologist, pointed out to him, that oftentimes busy people can't stop because they draw so much of their identity as a person from that busyness. And if I put it aside, then who am I? Where does my value, where does my identity go? And whether you're talking about retirement or vacations or just being a person, that's an addiction. When we are so addicted to being busy that we can't stop. Overwork hides the feelings of inadequacy or worthlessness, not just from others, but also hides it from ourselves. Slowing down enough to experience Sabbath can be disorienting. And this idea of doing nothing productive leaves us feeling vulnerable. Our identity is often attached to our level of busyness or to a title. And we all know that's not the healthiest way to be. So, last slide here. If you think about the best day off or the best Sabbath you've ever experienced, what did it look like? And again, I love the activity of coming together to worship. And many of us find great enjoyment and fulfillment from giving of our time and our talents to help lead and help participate and teach the children and all those kinds of things. Those are all very, very good things. They're things that we even draw energy from. It makes us happy, and we are excited to do those things. On the other side of that adrenaline process that we talked about earlier, there's the need for rest. There's the need to recharge. You don't drive a Tesla and never plug it in. The Sabbath is God's invitation to rest. It's a weekly habit or a weekly rhythm that He's wired into all creation. Nothing makes you the exception to God's rule when it comes to rest. And so I invite you to reconsider what Sabbath looks like on, dare I say, a daily basis as well as a weekly basis. And to be even more intentional about that boundary of finding the things that recharge and energize you and the things that give you rest. And I will, without diverting down another pathway here, there's a difference between entertainment and rest. There's a difference between entertainment and recreation. You might to kind of decompress and to rest from a busy day, want to watch a movie. And there's nothing wrong with watching a movie. But while you're being entertained, you're not truly resting. You're just kind of passing time. If you go out for a walk and listen to the birds and the wind blowing on you and just enjoying the outdoors, the fresh air, that recreates something in you. So there's different activities that might lead us to think that that's rest when it's not really doing for us what we need. And again, to make intentional choices about those things. It might even require writing out a weekly plan or simply identifying some obstacles that you'll need to protect against. It's just being intentional about the things that bring us rest and rejuvenate us. Let's pray. Wonderful God, we thank you for the gift of the Sabbath and the invitation to lead a balanced life, a life of rest and work in proper proportions, like the ingredients in our favorite dish. Each thing must be in its proper proportion, but sometimes it's hard to prioritize or to say no to something or to say stop when we need to rest. And so we need your wisdom as we go about life and as we go about making our choices and priorities. There's a lot of needs that we need to attend to, but we also need to be attentive to our own needs and to be good stewards of the energies that you've given us. So thank you, God, for giving us permission to rest. It's okay to set aside work, and for that we are very grateful. Help us to make that a regular practice. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks, Craig. This evening, our giveaway is actually the book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Good book.
And so I'm going to ask Craig, do you mind assisting me again here, and we can draw a name?
Right on.
Maybe if you mix them, I'll draw, and then...
Okay, I'll mix them around here. My name is not in here, so yeah. Okay.
All right, and then do you mind holding it? So, or you draw one, and then we can
Okay, okay. All right, there we go. Is it right side up?
Marcia Buckwitz. Yeah, there we go.
All right,
congratulations.
Cool. Yay.
There are a couple more chances to get that one, and other giveaways as well. So please be sure to come back and learn more. We have a lot of topics to still explore, and so we invite you to come back every evening if you can. Have a good night.